Okay, we've got both microphones on. Right, hello everybody, and hello on Teams as well. Just before I get started, I want to say a huge thank you to the organisers for giving me the opportunity to talk with you today. If anyone would like a copy of the slides, you can use this QR code. So if you open up your camera part on your phone, if you have any trouble with that, or if you just want to get in touch or talk about any of the things that I raised, please feel free to email me, julia.sarju@york.ac.uk. And the last thing I want to say before I start is that everything I'm going to talk about this morning has come out of collaborative work. So I want to highlight the National Association of Disabled Staff Networks, the Royal Society of Chemistry, who've encouraged and also funded much of the student work in these projects, the University of Kent in particular, Dr. Jennifer Lee, and the University of Liverpool in particular, Professor Anna Slater as well, who have been absolutely amazing to work with on these projects. So I always think it's helpful when we're talking about disability to start off with kind of where you're coming from. There are loads of different ways that people understand disability. And I think the definition that aligns most closely with how I'm thinking about disability and talking about it in this talk is from the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So this defines disability as an evolving concept, and that disability results from the interaction between persons with impairment and attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. The key things about this is it's really highlighting that disability is not an inevitable consequence. Is the sound okay on that right?
Yeah, apparently it's not very well. We'll just try and speak a little bit more towards them.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So disability is not an inevitable consequence of having an impairment or condition of being neurodivergent, but it arrives from that interaction with attitudes, environments, and behaviours. And I find this a much more kind of working, practical definition, because these are all things that we can do something about. Okay, so what's on the agenda for this morning? So I'm going to start off talking about the landscape for disabled scientists, and that's inclusive of disabled students. Okay. And then we're going to move on to focusing on some case studies and some examples of ways that disabled scientists are transforming the environments around them. Sorry for the people over there, I've got to face the mic this way. And then I want to finish off just by highlighting some fantastic networks. Okay, so landscape for disabled scientists. Okay, microphone number 3. Okay, right, is that better? Oh, fantastic. Now, last time I used one of these without having any pockets. I kept dropping the mic and tried to make jokes about it. I'm going to try not to do that this time. Okay, I can hear myself better now as well. So a bit of a spoiler here. In general, the evidence is saying that there's a lot of exclusion, experiences of exclusion for disabled scientists, disabled science students. If we start off thinking about in the UK, I'm going to share some statistics, but some important things to take into account is that the experience of disability is incredibly diverse. That it's really important to consider intersectional factors as well, and how people's experiences may be very different, how their access to inclusive spaces, careers, adjustments, and also how existing health inequalities impact on both the prevalence and the severity of disabilities as well. So it's a very broad mix. The data is also an underestimate. So I'm going to give you figures, but when you look into the statistics, these numbers vary year on year and depending on who's collecting them. And there's lots of things that affect that. Many people don't identify as disabled, even though they would meet the legal definition of disability. Not everyone has equal access to diagnosis. There's also different levels of stigma with different conditions. Now, the Department of Work and Pensions, their most recent data records 22% of our population as being disabled. So we're a really large group of people, but it's a very diverse group. In terms of the 2021 census, the rates of disability reported for different ethnicities varied hugely as well, with the highest rates of disability being reported for those who identified as white, gypsy or Irish traveller. Okay. What about if we focus in now on UK academia? Now, these numbers vary as well, but from the HESA data, I've chosen 2021 because we've got that for each of the different categories. 18% of undergraduate students declared a disability. Now, just who's there at university is only part of the picture. It also matters a lot what happens afterwards. So I just wanted to highlight the recent Buckland report, which focuses on the experiences and outcomes for autistic students. And autistic graduates are 2 times more likely to be unemployed after 15 months than non-disabled graduates, and are also much more likely to be underemployed, so working part-time or in roles that they are overqualified for. When we look at postgraduate students, the percentages start to drop off. So we've got lower numbers of postgraduate students declaring disabilities. And then when you look at academic staff, it's a big drop again. Now, we can't tell from this data for certain whether people are leaving academia, whether they're stopping reporting disabilities, but it's likely to be a mixture of these factors. Okay, so we've talked about the UK, we've talked about academia, but what about what we're kind of looking at in physical sciences in STEM? Okay, so we've got lower numbers again of undergraduate students than the general undergraduate population and the UK population as well, so we're underrepresented. It drops significantly for STEM academics. Recent EPSRC data showed very low rates of PhD studentships for disabled PhD students or prospective PhD students. And when you look at UKRI, the major funder or umbrella of funders, rates of disability declaration among applicants are very low, and then even lower still, or sometimes non-existent amongst those who win grants. Okay. What about our lab environment? So if we think about the lab environments, many of our subjects involve a lot of lab work, whether that's in our undergraduate study or in the different careers. What are some important things to think about? Where are the role models for disabled students and disabled staff? What about the accessibility of the physical environment? What about the digital resources and the other things that you need to navigate? What are the cultures like? And if we look at the evidence, there's actually a really large body of evidence, which unfortunately is highlighting inaccessibility, chilly environments and discrimination for disabled students and staff in STEM labs, gendered task distribution leading to inequitable educational outcomes, and those studies have been particularly done in physics and engineering. And above all, or across kind of all areas, a reduced sense of belonging for marginalised students. So now that I've really depressed you this morning, and with, there's a clear message that we have a really significant problem here, and that we're missing out on disabled talent, and that disabled students and staff are experiencing, really negative environments. But what can we do about it? It can feel really overwhelming. So what I want to do with the rest of my time is highlight some examples where disabled scientists are sharing their experiences, are working to change environments and really make places much more inclusive. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is a collaboration between students and staff looking at specifically chemistry labs. Now, there was a team of us doing this work, and it included MChem students, PhD students, postdoctoral researcher, and then academic staff across, me being education focused, Anna being in supramolecular chemistry, and Jennifer being an expert in sociology. Okay, so we had a really broad group looking at this. And one of the things we did was we spent a lot of time working on something called a collective autoethnography, which Jen, as a sociologist, was able to lead us on, getting us to share our experiences at our different stages and also our past experiences of labs, and then come together to have a collective voice. And I won't make you read the entire thing, but it's in our article on Accessible Labs if you would like to. But I'm just going to share a couple of extracts with you. Okay. So disabled students often get demoralized when the academic culture surrounding them holds a conventional wisdom that they are unlikely to succeed. And if they do succeed, it means that they were unlikely to have been truly disabled and should not have had the accommodations. So what we were trying to highlight here is this double bind that disabled people often feel, that if they do well and are open about their disability, that people may say or react to them like that they aren't really disabled. And at the moment, if you've been following a lot of the kind of press coverage of disabled people and PIP, which is it can be an in-work benefit, there is a lot of negative narratives around disabled people, around adjustments, and particularly around costs associated with those. Another second extract here, the dominant culture within chemistry seems to suggest that a good chemist can work long hours and know all the reactions. A disabled student may strive to reach these expectations at the expense of their health. So we really need to be thinking about what are our kind of social norms in our different disciplines, and are they excluding people, or are they putting unnecessary pressure? Are they actually helping us do good science and good teaching, or are these things we're doing at the expense of our health? Okay. Another large part of the project was running focus groups with disabled students and staff, and also inviting along health and safety experts, academics, and so quite broad groups to talk about labs and accessible labs. And you can read more about this in July when our book chapter on this will be coming out, and that's open access with UCL Press. So I just want to take the opportunity today to share some of these voices. And I'll just start with that now. So I had to go part-time because of health reasons. Different doesn't mean less productive. My mobility aids are seen as an inconvenience. Labs can be intimidating. There is a focus on stuff like memory, vision. This is hard when you have brain fog. You wear glasses if you need them, but you don't get the same for cognitive issues. And that's from a PI there. Now the next one's from a health and safety officer, and I found this one really important. A lot of things that are raised, and what they were referring to is like good practice, things that we can put in place to make labs more accessible, are not only about accessibility, it's about general health and safety and good practice. There's often discussions around disability inclusion where health and safety and disability adjustments are kind of pitted against each other. But what this health and safety officer was saying is that a lot of things we can do to make our labs more accessible can make the spaces more safe and less likely for accidents overall. And if we think about what are often causes of accidents, like being tired, making, human error, that if we have environments where we're able to thrive more, that can be a lot less. Next, I stayed at the same university because of support, but will there be consequences of that? Yes. This came up quite a lot. And so if anyone's involved in recruitment panels, I really urge you to think about, are we thinking one candidate is better because they've gone to lots of different universities? Another candidate may be just as good, but they may need to stay close to a particular hospital where they have their specialists, maybe where they have a care worker already. And so it's very difficult to have that sort of international or even local mobility. But it doesn't mean they're not just as capable a scientist. And the last one here, ivory tower ableism is not accepting of illness. There is a culture of not taking holidays or sick leave. And this is something that's harmful for all of us. And I really, this came from a PhD student, but I try and remember this whenever I'm taking a sick day or feeling bad about it. Be like, no, we need to have a culture where when we're sick, we can take time off, and that we should have holidays and revive ourselves. Okay. So analysing the data from the focus groups and also thinking about our own experiences with our collective autoethnography, we came up with lots of recommendations for how to make labs more accessible. And we split these into three main themes: so physical adjustments, accessible resources, and changes to the culture of chemistry. Now, in terms of physical adjustments, there's lots of different things, and sometimes it may feel like, well, we've got existing labs, but there are adjustments you can make to existing labs. And there's really good resources for that as well. Things like automatic doors, lighting in cupboards, lab support, lots of these physical adjustments. When talking to people, we found it was technicians making it happen, okay? And this is a really important factor when we're having a lot of funding challenges in HE, that making sure we have well-resourced and empowered technical staff who make a huge difference to the environment in our labs is a really important factor. Accessible resources, we're often thinking just about our physical space, but we use lots of software. There might be bespoke software. We'll have lab manuals, reporting procedures, lots of kind of maybe online administration. Are those tools accessible as well? And really importantly, changes to the culture of chemistry. People knowing and having the confidence they can share their access needs, come to the labs as their whole self, that makes such a huge difference. Okay, so the next study I want to talk to you about is about inclusive internship. So this was focused on disabled students working in collaboration and often leading on projects. And we've been doing this over the last 5 years. It's made a huge difference to us in the Department of Chemistry at the University of York. So back in 2019, Amy Curtin started with doing a huge review of teaching labs and things like our lab scripts and different resources we were using. Then we went on to look at small group teaching, so workshops, tutorials, and particularly the resources, so the question sheets, online tutorial quizzes, things like that. And then moving on to lectures, so lecture materials, and also the experience of being in lectures or using lecture capture. And then thinking about assessment and student resources. And last summer, Kay and Rowan did a huge amount of work and student consultation with neurodivergent students, looking at inclusive active learning in workshops and how to make sure that's neurodivergent inclusive. And there's lots of things that have come out of these projects. The main thing is it's been really transformative for us as staff. We've learned so much from working with our students on these projects. It's also practically made lots of impact in terms of the resources that we provide to our students, our skills and knowledge in terms of making accessible resources. And we've got things like book chapters, staff and student guides, videos and templates and things like that. I asked Abby, Kay and Beth if there was anything that they wanted, any key messages that they wanted to share. So I just want to include these here. Accessibility benefits everyone. It doesn't happen by accident. We need to be actively inclusive. Student partnerships allow students to feel like their voices are being heard and making change. And also that remote internships allow for students to have an accessible space to be heard and make a difference. Okay, now the last case study I want to share with you is looking at sensory experiences in chemistry labs. So over the last couple of years, we've been doing qualitative work, listening to our students and how they're experiencing our workshops and labs. And here we're going to focus in on labs. So what is sensory overload? Well, it's overstimulation of one or more of the body's senses. And one of the students who participated in our study, the way they defined it was, when my environment is overstimulating and affecting one or more of my senses, making it difficult to process what's going on or the surroundings, or making it harder to focus. Now, we were really inspired to do this work by Dr. Flaherty, who a few years ago published an article in the Journal of Chemical Education, and she referred to our teaching labs as potential sensory overload vortex. So really, emotive, and it really got us thinking at York about what impact our labs could be having on our students and what changes could we make to make it a more inclusive environment. Now, we've been working on a qualitative study, and we were really surprised. Sometimes it can be hard to recruit students, but we found that in chemistry at York, and we've got a separate study in biology that we're working on, but I'm not including that here because we're not as far with the data. But students really came forward to take part. So we've had 151 undergraduate students take part in our qualitative surveys. And then we've also conducted 6 interviews so far with undergrads and also graduate teaching assistants, which you might call demonstrators at your institution. So postgraduates who teach in the labs. We've had a mix of people taking part from mostly first, second and third year, especially first year students. And interestingly, about 24% of these students are identifying as neurodivergent, but 23% are unsure of whether or not they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. And we think just from this point, it's a really good case for that we need to be talking a lot more about neurodiversity with our students and kind of raising awareness. Now, with that unsure, that might be that some people do think that they're neurodivergent, but they don't have a diagnosis. That was something that came up when we talked to students in interviews as well, where they didn't feel that they could tick this box unless they had a formal diagnosis. And the times to take that can be really, really long, sometimes up to 2 years, if not longer. Now, in terms of did they experience sensory overload? So 31% of our respondees said they had experienced sensory overload in our labs during their time at York. We then gave everyone more information about what sensory overload is. So first we just asked them, And then the number went up to 44%. So there were further students who had experienced it but didn't know what sensory overload was. So really quite significant numbers of students. Though if anyone's experiencing this, it's significant. In terms of what was triggering, the most common reported was sound. And in the labs, in our labs, we have large labs with large groups in at a time. So one of the largest sources of that sound is just the chatter, the movement of so many bodies in the lab. Other things that were raised were around the protective personal equipment we use, so gloves, lab coats, safety specs. During the pandemic, there's also masks as well. And you might already be wearing glasses underneath your lab specs, and the types of gloves you wear may vary. Other things that were brought up were things around lights, smells, temperature, restricted movement, and that could be within your PPE, but also when you're working kind of under the fume cupboard as well, and how that restricts your movement. Temperature was another thing that was brought up quite a lot, and other people. And with the other people, that sometimes related to anxiety around being with so many people, and also depending on how comfortable individuals were with the people in their environment. Now, in terms of sound, there are lots of sources in the labs. Let's see if I can get this to work. So we went in and just recorded some to show. Ready. Is I cannot make that volume control. Yeah. Let's try that again. So hopefully from that we can hear is just in the background there's lots of clinking, there's that murmuring of different people talking, there's also the air circulation going. So there are a lot of sources of sound, even when people aren't directly, loudly professing to the whole groups. In terms of the consequences, so there's one thing to look at how many people are experiencing, but what is the impact on the individual? And some of the people who responded said that, it felt like physical pain, or that it had a huge impact on them outside of the labs or on their further studies. In terms of patterns, we were noticing in the data that a lot of people talked about it causing them stress and then making mistakes. Those mistakes meaning that they were falling behind and then having to stay longer in that environment, and that meaning that they then had less time left in the day to complete other work, perhaps to do the more kind of writing calculation side of their labs, or that it was then they were needing time to recover afterwards. And I've included a quote here, which I think really got me thinking, because we're often talking about why are students rushing to leave the labs when we want them to enjoy the environment, stay, work through the data, talk to demonstrators. And one of our participants was saying, I prioritize just making it through the day rather than getting everything done. Another shared that they get to the point where they break down and they just can't respond anymore. So for some students, it's having a really huge impact on them. Now, what are some potential triggers? So some things that we can look for. So there's lots of practical things we can do in terms of upgrading lights, trying to zone areas so that there's less student movement around the larger space. But really importantly, none of these are going to be enough to get rid of all of these sources. So it's really important to provide this time and space for breaks, allow for rest and recovery from sensory stress and overload. So the recommendations that came out of this project are around consultation and partnership. So making sure that everything we do is meeting real rather than perceived needs. And this is really the mantra of the disability justice movement: nothing about us without us. We should be expecting diversity rather than just responding to differences when we're made aware of them. And even when disability information is shared, us as individuals might not be aware when we're teaching. Centre that intersectionality, because they're going to be very unique experiences and compounded barriers for different students, and that we really need to raise awareness of neurodiversity, but also of sensory stress. And overall, creating a friendly environment where people do feel safe to share when they aren't comfortable in an environment and to share their access needs. In terms of things maybe to provoke you to think about, what sources of sensory overload are present in your learning and teaching environments? How might that impact on students' learning and well-being? And could this be contributing to any experience or rewarding gaps? Okay, So the last thing I want to do quickly is just highlight the importance of staff networks, because they're great groups to join, but also to collaborate with. And they provide a place of belonging, of acceptance, of unconditional emotional and practical support. So the first one I want to highlight is NADSN, who I work with. They're a super network. If you're at an institution, a university, there's probably a disabled network, and then NADSN's the super network supporting all of those. And they're really active, doing lots of work to break down barriers. We've given evidence to government reports. We've worked with funders, all sorts of different things, and with learned societies. Another really important one is Enable Science with the RSC, and their mission is to support disabled individuals to succeed in science, and they're working to increase representation of disabled scientists and improve their sense of belonging. And they're a partner of the Royal Society of Chemistry. And I also wanted to highlight the Women in Supramolecular Chemistry Network. They're a great one to look at for a way to apply maybe to your own area. There's lots of great mentoring schemes, and they've raised lots of awareness of issues. They've published loads of articles on all sorts of things, including like pregnancy in the lab, parenting, and they've got loads of really great information. Okay, so just to finish off then, I guess my concluding thoughts are, in addition to adjustments, which are sometimes very reactive, we really need to be transforming our cultures. We need to listen to lived experiences and plan for inclusive partnerships. It's not good enough just to offer out for people to talk to us. We need to make sure that they are able to and encouraged to be able to participate. Networks are doing really amazing inclusion work, and there are loads of opportunities to get involved. And I hope that that's something that many of you will want to do, and many of you are already doing from the fantastic talks I heard yesterday. So I just want to finish saying thank you, and if anyone has any questions.